In the 7th century, an Irish king named Damon suffered a loss that broke his mind. Following the death of his wife, he descended into a state of severe, unhinged grief. Fixated on her physical resemblance to his wife, Damon decided he would marry his own teenage daughter, Dymphna. He viewed her not as a child, but as a way to recreate the woman he had lost. Dymphna fled Ireland to escape her father's demands. Accompanied by her confessor, a priest named Patroness, she crossed the sea and eventually settled in the quiet forest near Geel in modern-day Belgium. But Damon tracked them down. When Dymphna refused to submit to his obsession, the king drew his sword and beheaded his own daughter on the spot. In the theology of the early church, this refusal to yield to a parent's madness was seen as more than just a sacrifice. It was a commitment to maintaining clarity and moral order in the face of absolute chaos. There is a catch to this story. We have no 7th century evidence that Dymphna actually lived. Her life was first written down by a canon named Peter of Cambrai in 1247, 600 years after the events supposedly took place. While the princess's specific history is based on oral tradition rather than archives, we can verify the documented medical legacy her story left in the town of Geel. The local belief in Dymphna's martyrdom transformed her into the patron saint of mental health, drawing thousands of afflicted pilgrims to her burial site to seek relief for their own psychological distress. This created a unique historical situation. A legend about the destructive nature of madness became the catalyst for the world's most enduring sanctuary of psychiatric care. By the 15th century, pilgrims were arriving in Geel by the thousands. They were seeking cures for demonic afflictions, seizures, and severe mental illness. At this time, the standard approach to mental health across Europe was isolation. The afflicted were routinely chained, locked in asylums, or subjected to physical torture to drive out their demons. Geel reached a breaking point. The Church of St. Dymphna was so overwhelmed with visitors that the clerics simply ran out of space to house the hundreds of sick people sleeping in the pews. Driven by this logistical emergency, the town's clerics began paying local farmers and citizens to take the mentally ill into their own private homes. This accidental policy changed the trajectory of care in the town, moving the afflicted from the isolation of a church cellar into the daily life of a community. In Geel, these individuals were never treated as inmates. They were referred to as boarders, paying guests who were expected to participate in the life of the family. This flowchart illustrates the therapeutic engine of the Geel model. While the asylum model relies on isolation, which often leads to stagnation, the Geel system uses family routine and farm labor to provide a stabilizing environment. Looking at medical outcomes, boarders in family structures show lower medication reliance and reduced depressive episodes. By 1850, the Belgian government formally recognized the success of this tradition, taking over the funding and medical oversight to turn the town's foster program into a state-sanctioned medical model. Through centuries of daily trial and error, the families of Geel demonstrated that a social network and a predictable daily routine provide a level of mental stability that clinical confinement cannot replicate. This line chart shows the program scaling up to its peak in 1938, when 3,736 boarders were living alongside the town's residents. While the numbers have tapered to around 500 today, the core principle remains intact. In the 1970s, an American researcher named Ellen Baxter traveled to Geel to study why this community succeeded in absorbing the mentally ill, while others struggled with rejection. When Baxter returned to New York City, the contrast was sharp. The failure of the institutional asylum system had left thousands of vulnerable people homeless, living in public toilets and subway stations. Baxter mapped the Geel blueprint onto New York, founding Broadway Housing to provide integrated private residences for the homeless, a direct application of the Belgian border philosophy. The success of these programs in New York indicates that the Geel model is a replicable architecture for human dignity that can work across different cultures and centuries. We may never fully untangle the 7th century history of Dymphna from the legends that have surrounded her for 800 years. However, the legacy of the town's response has survived, where the historical records of her life have not. A medieval story about a family destroyed by a father's madness ultimately inspired an entire town to use their own families
to serve as a model for an ideal family.